My name is Leila Farsakh. I'm the chair of the Political Science Department and a professor of political science at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. I would like to begin by thanking the Arab Center at DC and the Institute of Palestine Studies for organizing this important discussion and inviting me to moderate it. We have with us this morning a very distinguished group of academics and practitioners who have joined us to assess the implications of the 2021 Palestinian elections. As you all know, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas announced on Friday, April 30th, that the Palestinians' election will be postponed indefinitely. With that in mind, the panelists will discuss the dynamics behind this announcement and the impact of the election postponements on Palestinian politics and national aspiration, including Palestinian rights, national reconciliation, and the prospects of a negotiated peace settlement and a Palestinian state. The discussion will also review the dynamics of the current intra-Palestinian political divisions and paralysis, the ramification for future elections, and Palestinian public reactions to the delay announcement, as well as the roles, perspective, and expectations of the international community, especially the Biden administration and the European Union. We will begin with short remarks from each of our panelists, followed by a Q&A with the audience. You do not need to wait until the Q&A portion to submit your questions. You can use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit questions to the panel at any time, or you can email your questions to events@arabcenterdc.org. I will now briefly introduce today's panelists in their speaking order. First, we have with us Adnan Abu Amer, who is the head of the Political Science Department at the University of Ummah in Gaza. He will discuss how people and leadership in Gaza view the elections and their postponements, as well as the impact of their postponements is having on Palestinian national reconciliation and their prospect for establishing an inclusive Palestinian leadership. After that, we'll have Tahreer Araj, who is the executive director of Miftah, the Palestinian Initiative for the Promotion of the Global Dialogue and Democracy. She will focus on the impact of the election and their postponement for the Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza and East Jerusalem, and how it will impact the legitimacy of the Palestinian Authority, as well as provide us an assessment of the importance of holding elections in any attempt to respect democracy and human rights. Unfortunately, Ms. Tahreer could not be with us, but she sent her presentation and we will be reading it. After that, we're going to have Aya Omran Randal, who is assistant professor at the Doha Institute of Graduate Studies. Her remarks will cover the international law, what international law has to say with regard to the Palestinian elections, Palestinian rights, and the Palestinian cause more generally. And last but not least, we're going to have Salem Barahmeh, who is the executive director of the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. He will give us an overview of the US and international point of view on these elections, their reaction to the potential results and postponements, as well as what the role the Biden administration can play in the current crisis and in pressuring the Palestinian Authority. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being with us today. I now turn to Mr. Adnan to give us his comments. The floor is yours.
شكرا لكم على هذه الاستضافة الكريمة، وأنا آسف موضوع اللغة لكن مضطرين نكون نقدم شيء رصين على الأقل. شكرا مقدما للمركز العربي والزملاء في هذا تنظيم الندوة السياسية المهمة في هذا التوقيت المهم، وشكرا للزميل مقداد على هذا الجهد الذي سيبذل معنا في الدقائق القادمة.
First of all, I would like to thank you so very much for having me, and I apologize about the language issue and translation issue, but we wanted to be more accurate. And thank you for the Arab Center, Washington, D.C., and thank you for all of my panelist colleagues, and thank you for the translator.
تطورات متلاحقة شهدت الساحة الفلسطينية عموما وقطاع غزة خصوصا عقب قرار الرئيس الفلسطيني محمود عباس بتأجيل الانتخابات التشريعية. بعد أن كان الفلسطينيون في غزة بالذات لديهم تشوق كبير لممارسة هذا الحق الدستوري الذي اعتبروا تأجيله اغتصابا للسلطة وجريمة دستورية وانفرادا بالقرار.
The Palestinian landscape is witnessing fast-paced developments following President Mahmoud Abbas's decision to postpone legislative elections which prompted angry Palestinian reactions as they considered this decision a power grab, a constitutional crime, and a monopoly of the election and decision making.
في غزة بالذات رغم من الإشارات واضحة عن حالة الحراك الانتخابي والتسجيل والإعلان القوائم الانتخابية، لكن أهل غزة والقوى السياسية فيها كانت تشعر بوجود إشارات واضحة من قبل الفريق السياسي محيط الرئيس أن هناك قرار تأجيل وشيك للانتخابات في ضوء معطيات داخلية تؤكد أن هناك هزيمة محققة ستمنى بها قائمة حركة فتح التي يقودها بسبب حالة التشظي التي تعيشها الحركة بين ثلاث قوائم انتخابية.
Especially in Gaza, and weeks ago, there have been clear indications by the political team surrounding President Abbas, making references to the pending decision of postponement, given a wide range of internal parameters that all indicated an assured electoral upset for the PLO list, led by Abbas, because of its state of disarray, its facing and its division into three lists.
نعم. طبعا لا شك أن حماس بالذات كحركة تسيطر على قطاع غزة كان لديها تقدير موقف يشير أنها ستفوز بهذه الانتخابات بالرغم من تراجع شعبيتها نسبيا في قطاع غزة بسبب الوضع الاقتصادية والإدارية، لكنها كانت تعول كثيرا على نجاحها في الضفة الغربية بسبب فساد السلطة الفلسطينية والأوضاع الأمنية السيئة وحالة التشظي التي تعيشها فتح في ظل قوائمها الانتخابية وحالة الصراع التي تسود الحركة وستستفيد منها حماس بشكل أو بآخر.
Especially Hamas in Gaza and the West Bank were counting deeply and strongly on these elections, especially as its popularity was decreasing lately because of different variant reasons.
على الأقل في ضوء معلوماتي الشخصية حماس بذلت جهود مضنية في الأسابيع الأخيرة للتأكيد على موضوع الانتخابات وتسجيل قوائمها وتقديم قائمة إلى حد ما أقل وضوحا أنها قائمة حماس الرسمية في ظل وجود كوادر أكاديمية مرشحين نقابيين تقنيين تكنوقراط، وعلى الأقل لمحاولة اجتياز هذه العقبة السياسية القائمة ومحاولة الفوز بالانتخابات، لكن ليس بالضرورة فوزا كاسحا كبيرا يعيدنا إلى ذات النقطة السابقة بتشكيل حكومة وفرض الحصار من جديد.
Hamas is also has been exerting very intensive efforts to register its candidates from trade unionists, from technocrats, and it's really exerting a lot of issues trying to win this time. Maybe it's not going to be an overwhelming win, but it at least will have some gains.
في الوقت ذاته حماس في غزة بالذات أفسحت المجال لمشاركة لافتة من قبل تيار محمد دحلان خصم الرئيس عباس اللدود بإعادة عشرات من كوادره الذين يقيمون في مصر والإمارات إلى غزة لتشكيل قائمة انتخابية قوية قد تشكل يعني خصما قويا لقائمة الرئيس عباس، وبذلك حماس كانت تريد أن تجري نوع من التحالف المسبق مع قائمة دحلان فيما لو حصلت انتخابات تشريعية.
Also, Hamas was trying to coalesce with Mohammed Dahlan's list, and it was trying to form a strong opponent to Abbas's PLO's list, and it's trying hard to strategize over those divisions by the PLO list because of also again its state of disarray and division.
بس فقط توضيح، هي قوائم حركة فتح وليس PLO وليس منظمة التحرير حتى تكون الدقة واضحة أفضل للمشاهدين.
Yes, please replace PLO with Fatah lists.
Movement, yes.
Thank you.
إلى جانب هذه التحضيرات المحلية والفلسطينية الداخلية، الفلسطينيين في غزة لاحظوا عن كثب حجم الزيارات المكوكية الإقليمية والدولية إلى رام الله ولقاء مبعوثين أمنيين وسياسيين عرب وغربيين مع الرئيس عبد الماز لمحاولة بحث سياق الانتخابات، تأجيلها، توحيد فتح من الداخل حتى لا تعود ذات النتائج 2006 وتفوز حماس من جديد.
Also in Gaza, people have noticed there's so many visits by delegates from Arab and foreign countries, from security and politicians and diplomats trying to postpone or trying to maybe also cancel these elections for good, and people are not very satisfied with those developments.
في الوقت ذاته كان العامل الإسرائيلي واضحا وفاعلا أكثر من سواه في الأراضي الفلسطينية بشكل عام، من خلال ضغوط إسرائيلية مورست على أبو مازن لتأجيل الانتخابات. تمثل ذلك في زيارة رئيس الجهاز الأمني العام الإسرائيلي للرئيس وطلب ذلك. تمثل ذلك في الجيش الإسرائيلي اعتقالات متلاحقة على مدار الساعة لكوادر حماس ومرشحيها، مما دفع حماس في غزة في لحظة ما إلى أن تجعل مرشحيها في القائمة الانتخابية في غزة أكثر عددا من الضفة الغربية، تفاديا لاعتقالات كبيرة قد تشنها إسرائيل على مرشحيها ونوابها الفائزين إذا ما حصلت انتخابات.
In addition to that, there is also the pressure from Israel, from Israeli army, and all the arrests that has been launched in the West Bank, and that's why Hamas has more of the candidacy in Gaza rather than the West Bank because of these Israeli operations and the pressure that Israel is putting on the election as a whole.
رغم كل هذه التحضيرات التي شهدنا في غزة للانتخابات، تسجيل القوائم، تحضير الدعاية الانتخابية، يعني الناس عاشوا أجواء إلى حد ما يعني ديمقراطية نسبيا للتحضير لممارسة الحق الدستوري، لكن في وقت ذاته أيضا عاشت غزة في الأيام الأخيرة قبل إعلان نتائج الانتخابات حالة من الحراك، الاستنفار، التأهب لإمكانية صدور قرار بتأجيل الانتخابات، ولذلك شهدنا مسيرات، احتجاجات، بيانات صادرة كلها تؤكد على عدم مشروعية أي قرار يصدر بتأجيل الانتخابات.
And in spite of all this preparation, the campaigns, and people have enjoyed some democratic environments to work for the election campaigns, but at the same time there have been protest and activism protesting this decision and trying to avoid it in a popular voice.
اليوم وقد تأجلت الانتخابات. فلسطينيين عموما وفي غزة خصوصا عندهم قناعة تقترب من اليقين أن موضوع القدس ليس إلا ذريعة غير مقنعة للفلسطينيين لتأجيل الانتخابات. هذا كلام عبثي وغير مقنع، مع أنه أنا على الأقل تواصلت مع زملاء في لجنة الانتخابات المركزية أبلغوني أنه مقترحات عديدة قدمت لموضوع القدس، التصويت الإلكتروني وهو قائم فعليا، السفارات الغربية في القدس، شرقي القدس موجودة عمليا، ممكن مقرات الأمم المتحدة الدولية، يمكن أن يعني كل هذه الأسباب والإمكانيات كانت قائمة بشدة، لكن الرئيس كان عنده قرار مسبق بأنه ما لم تتوحد قوائم فتح الداخلية لن تحصل انتخابات، النتيجة ستكون هزيمة مدوية بحقه.
Today there is also a wide range of protest because this postponement pretext that was given is not acceptable, and it's not even convincing because there are many proposals of using maybe Western embassies and United Nations facilities as polling centers, and it appears that President Abbas was premeditated because he saw the fractions at his Fatah lists, and he was maybe sure that he was going to be upset in a big way.
اليوم الفلسطينيين في غزة يعتقدون أنه هذا القرار التأجيل أحبطهم، سبب لهم خيبة أمل كبيرة جدا. لا أخفيكم كان عندنا في غزة على الأقل يعني رغبة جامحة بممارسة حق دستوري. عندنا الآن آخر انتخابات حصلت في 2006، يعني 15 عام، جيل كامل يمارس حق الدستور الانتخابي، ولذلك الرئيس يعني بجرة قلم انفرادية حرمنا هذا الحق كأجيال فلسطينية موجودة في الأرض الفلسطينية وغزة خصوصا. ولذلك هذا القرار بالتأكيد يفسح مجال لوجود نقاشات على مدار الساعة في الأراضي الفلسطينية خاصة في غزة، لمحاولة الرد على هذا القرار وإيجاد صيغة جديدة تخرج الوضع الفلسطيني من حالة الانفراد في القرار السياسي.
Today there is a big disappointment because we actually, the Palestinians in general and especially in Gaza, had always have a strong desire to have these elections because the latest in 2006 was the latest that a whole generation has missed so far. So the president has prevented us from this right, and that will lead us to open up discussions and talks around the clock, and to try to find and reach a new formula that we can oppose this decision and go on to do and conduct elections.
اليوم بعد مرور اسبوع تقريبا على قرار تاجيل الانتخابات، غزه تشعر نفسها في حاله ورشه عمل على مدار الساعه من كل الفصائل، بالاستثناء قائمه فتح الرئيسيه برئيس ابو مازن، في حين قوائم فتح الاخرى برغوثي وقدوه ودحلان مشاركه في هذه النقاشات الفلسطينيه الداخليه لمناقشه مجموعه من الخيارات قد تبدو متطرفه، قد تبدو صعبه، لكنها قائمه: رفع الغطاء الشعبي عن الرئيس ابو مازن، الدعوه لاجتماع أمان عامين في بيروت كما حصل قبل اشهر، تشكيل مجلس تاسيسي في قطاع غزه، رفض تشكيل حكومه وحده وطنيه برئاسه ابو مازن لانها قد يعيد الى ذات. كل هذه النقاشات بالتاكيد تشهد غزه في هذه الاونه، وقد نكون في قادم الايام امام استحقاقات صعبه في حق القضيه الفلسطينيه.
Now, a week after that decision was made, in Gaza, there's an active way of running workshops by all parties, except for Fatah list, of course, and there are lists of al-Barghouthi and Dahlan, and everyone is trying to discuss these options. Some of them could be difficult and might even be considered extreme. Our goal here is to uncover this popular mask that Abbas is trying to enjoy, and we would also want to organize and form our organizations to work harder in strategic ways to achieve our rights, electoral rights.
اخيرا، نحن في غزه على الاقل ما زلنا في طور النقاشات كقوى سياسيه، نقابات مهنيه، مثقفين، اكاديميين، في حاله نقاش جدي حول وضع حد لهذه السياسه الانفراديه من قبل ابو مازن وعدم انفراده بهذه السياسه الداخليه، لان ذلك بالتاكيد شكل هزه ارضيه كبيره في الساحه الفلسطينيه تاجيل الانتخابات، وستكون له ارتدادات في قادم الايام لا احد يعلم مآلاتها.
And finally, the Palestinians in general, and especially here in Gaza, we are running a wide range of discussions from trade unions, from intellectuals, and every party involved in a serious discussion. We are trying to stop President Abbas' one-handed policy making and decision making by stopping or postponing the elections. It is a serious decision that could have very serious consequences as well. So we will have to work against it.
Thank you. شكرا لكم على هذا الاستماع. شكرا كثير.
Thank you very much for this very insightful overview of what's happening in Gaza. I'm sure many of us were not aware or are not aware of what's going on, and to hear that there are all these attempts to try and hold Abbas accountable or oppose his unilateral action. We are now going to move on here from Tahreer, Araj. So I believe we're going to read her statement since she cannot make it. As I said, she's the executive director of Miftah in the West Bank.
The title of Tahreer al-Araj remarks the implications of the elections for the Palestinian national aspirations. Last December, President Mahmoud Abbas gave Palestinians a glimmer of hope by issuing a decree calling for general elections following a string of presidential decrees and laws over the years since the political division in 2007. The elections decree came on the heels of an agreement between Palestinian political parties and factions aimed at resolving outstanding issues and ultimately ending this division through the ballot box. However, this glimmer of hope soon diminished. When just before election campaigning were about to start, President Abbas issued yet another decree postponing the elections, thereby undermining the reawakened desire of the people to exercise their democratic rights and choose their representatives. What do the elections mean to the Palestinians in the West Bank and Jerusalem? For Palestinians in the West Bank, the elections mean an end to the vicious legal state in which Palestinians live, both at the individual and collective levels. This is an opportunity to achieve a few points, and I will read 8 of them. 1, create a solid political system based on an institutional-based rather than an individual-based structure. 2, create representatives of the Palestinian people that are capable of legislating laws and ensuring the rule of it, and revising and redirecting budgets to tackle the needs of the different sectors, especially in the less advantaged areas. And 3, end the state of exclusivity in governance and the blurred lines between the 3 branches of power, legislative, executive, and judicial, and return to the separation of these 3 powers, so there is no overlapping in duties or authorities. At present, it seems as though the president is in full control of these 3 powers, especially after the laws by decree and the subsequent appointments in the judiciary. This will effectively end the concept of law by decree that took the place of legislation, becoming the norm rather than an emergency measure. 4, the Palestinian Legislative Council elections for those living in the West Bank is an opportunity to stem the encroachment of clearly policy-aligned capital, establishing solid groundwork to jumpstart this change towards a fairer distribution of resources. 5, if presidential elections are held, there will be a chance for us to at least have a legitimate president voted in by the people. Most likely, this will be a living ex-president. The Palestinians have not experienced anything like this before. The Palestinian National Council, the PNC, is a framework encompassing all Palestinians, both in Palestine and in the diaspora. And this is an opportunity to rebuild this council so it can play a role in breathing new life into the PLO, the sole and legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. 7, as for Jerusalem, the election is an opportunity for Jerusalemites to interact with and be involved in Palestinian politics, and under different circumstances than in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. This is due to the Israeli occupation on the ground in Jerusalem, which it considers the capital of Israel. The elections would have been a chance to restore the Palestinian political connection, even though the national connection and the common destiny of Palestinians have never disappeared. The elections, or the attempt at holding them in occupied Jerusalem, would have at least returned to the forefront the concept of Jerusalem or East Jerusalem as the capital of the future Palestinian state, in accordance with international law. This would have been imposed at least on Israel and would therefore have reminded the world of its responsibilities in this regard. The postponement of the elections in this fashion is a full submission to Israel's refusal to allow elections in Jerusalem, in violation of the agreed upon signed agreements between the 2 parties concerning these issues. 8, hopefully this postponement would have at least brought to the forefront the reality of Israel's occupation of Jerusalem and the urgent need to find a political solution to the conflict. It is proof that political actions must start from the bottom up, that is, liberation from occupation first, rather than the other way around. For Palestinian citizens concerned with social affairs and laws, the elections would have been an opportunity to put laws back on office desks and not inside the drawers of government or the president's office. For example, A law by decree on cybercrimes was issued, yet a law by decree on the right to access information was not. And this is a major step in combating corruption for press freedom and the freedom of opinion and expression. Other examples include a law by decree that should be issued for the family protection law, which is extremely important given its provisions ending impunity and reducing sentences and punishments, thus eliminating bias and offense against issues pertaining to the family. The lack of ratification of a Palestinian penal code should also be mentioned, especially that in the West Bank, the Jordanian Penal Code of 1960 is in effect, while in Gaza, the Egyptian Penal Code of 1936 is the one in effect. Both are outdated and do not express the specificities of developments in the Palestinian society. Same goes to the personal status laws. Now I will move to speak about the legitimacy of the Palestinian Authority and the election process. I'll be making 3 points with this regard. One, the Palestinian reality is this. The Palestinian Legislative Council's term is over. It was dissolved by a presidential decree under the guise of the Constitutional Court, which was appointed by the president. This council or court only convened a few times and without any impact until the division occurred in 2007. Mahmoud Abbas was elected as president in 2005 after the death of the late president Yasser Arafat. Till this day, he has been the head of the Palestinian political system, that is a total of 16 years, which are 4 presidential terms without re-election and renewing his legitimacy by the people, who are the source of power. 2, simply the 3 branches of authority do not have legitimacy. The executive authority, according to the Palestinian Basic Law, shall respond to the legislative authority for all the necessary requests, whom can hold them accountable to any violation. However, the executive authority, both the government and the presidency, have clearly and blatantly infringed on legislative jurisdictions, while the presidency took on the duty of legislation. The government, meanwhile, assumed the task of passing budgets and distributing resources. As for the judicial authority, it is not in a better shape. The laws by decree issued by the president at the end of last year and the beginning of this year put the judiciary in the hands of a few of President Abbas's close acquaintances. Under no circumstances should those who operate on the premise of the judiciary to guarantee impartiality ever be appointed by the president directly, whom they are accountable for according to the Basic Law. Number 3, the legitimacy of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO. The PLO is the undisputed sole and legitimate representative of the Palestinian people from a political aspect. However, the overall framework of the PLO, which stems from the PNC, the Palestinian National Council, cannot remain based on a quota system among the parties that comprise the PLO without consideration for the changes on the ground with the establishment of new forces or the semi-disappearance of old ones. It is unacceptable that the PLO has remained this long without the representation of over 40% of Palestinians who do not believe in the representation of the PLO factions anymore. This is in addition to the results of the last election and opinion polls on these postponed elections that point to similar sentiment. What is required is the consensus of all Palestinians so the PLO can regain its true status as a clear and unequivocal representative of the Palestinian people everywhere. And the last section of my remarks have to do with the impact of the elections on freedoms and human rights. And here I have 4 points. 1, democratic election is a legitimate right and a constitutional entitlement and duty of all authorities that adopt a democratic system. This should carry out periodic elections on set dates with no postponements, unless under extenuating circumstances. What is happening in Palestine is considered a violation of human rights in this regard. How can a system based on the Basic Law that clearly states the significance of holding elections be a system without the transfer of power through the ballot box, thus be transformed into a quasi-kingdom where powers are in the hands of the president? 2, In previous years, specifically after the intra-Palestinian division, we have noticed certain indications pointing to the rise of a police state based mostly on its security forces. This is something we have strongly warned against, the lack of legitimacy and the overall lack of satisfaction to everything happening, ultimately allowing for a state of security chaos in one way or the other. This is because there are no avenues for democratic and controllable change, consequently allowing security forces to infringe even more on freedoms. This is evident from the repeated shootings, in addition to the lack of control over several areas in the West Bank, categorized as Area C. And that creates a dark picture that does not bode well for Palestinians if things remain the same. 3, we are experiencing a constant renewal of the state of emergency because of the coronavirus pandemic. However, we should be concerned about the extension and re-extension and announcement of this state of emergency for over a year without legal justification and in violation of the basic law. There were no tangible measures on the ground pertaining to the pandemic that would clearly show the benefits of keeping the state of emergency. 4, the topic that has most caught the attention of the public recently has been the COVID-19 vaccines. From the moment they arrived, the public has been preoccupied with how they were distributed, with those affiliated with the government brazenly receiving them first. This culminated in the open declaration by the Minister of Health, saying that vaccines were basically administered to officials. In a system that has the means and mechanisms for inspection, it should follow up and hold the wrongdoers accountable. This should, in the best case scenario, lead to the resignation of the entire government and the punishment of everyone involved. On this premise, we must all push for elections to be held, because the social contract is now one vertical direction, imposed from the top of the hierarchy downwards, without one legitimate or legal vaccine dose administered. And this is the end of Tahreer Araj remarks.
Thank you very much. This is very illuminating and comprehensive with regards to why the elections are important to happen, both for the Palestinians from a political point of view as much as from a human rights point of view. So thank you very much. We move now to Aya Randall.
Thank you so much. Let's talk law now, and let's just tackle things from a different angle. We're just going to retrieve the experience of the past, the previous elections, and learn some lessons from these elections and see how the legal infrastructure is not supporting really a real democratic process. So I'm going to actually tackle the topic of the Palestinian elections, the peaceful transition of power, and international law. Palestine had to go through a long political and diplomatic journey to be recognized in the international arena as a full sovereign state. In this regard, Palestine submitted its application of full UN membership on the 23rd of September 2011. However, this application was rejected by the permanent members of the Security Council. A year later, the BA submitted its application to gain the status of the observer non-member state of the UN. This application was accepted on the 29th of November 2012. Accordingly, and based on the observer non-member status, Palestine managed to accede to international treaties and conventions starting from April 2014. In this regard, it managed to accede and ratify 98 treaties by November 2020. Acceding to these human rights treaties supposedly leads to the promotion of human rights environment in the Palestinian territories, including the right of political participation stated in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of 1966. These new variables may urge us to ask the question, what did the BA do in preparation for the coming elections? What did the BA do to make this election different from the previous one? Especially in the light of the fact that the BA is bearing the responsibility of executing its international obligations with utmost good faith by harmonizing its legal, political systems with the international standards. Examining the status quo shows that the seeds of conflict are still there. So how can we expect that this election will be any different from the previous one? How could we assume that this election will resolve the previous conflicts when the same reasons of disagreements are still the same? The problem appears clearly in the domain of the transition of power. The main areas of conflict that may impede the peaceful transition of power can be viewed from different perspectives. I will actually give examples of these problematic issues. The first problematic issue is the nature of the Palestinian political system. The political system can be divided, as we all know, into two main systems: the presidential political system, where the president of the state is the head of the executive authority. The president also helped in the process of forming government, and the president is elected by people directly. The parliamentary system, where the president is elected by the parliament and the president's authorities are just merely symbolic. The prime minister is representing the parliamentary or the major parliamentary bloc, and the newly formed government also needs the parliamentary votes of confidence. The hybrid systems can contain the attributes of both systems. The Palestinian system can be classified as a hybrid system. That is, the president is elected directly by people. Moreover, it's parliamentary in terms of the fact that the government needs the parliamentary votes of confidence. This was stated clearly in Article 5 of the Palestinian Basic Law. However, when Hamas entered the political process and won the elections of 2006, the Palestinian political scene became much more complicated. This new variable raised the questions concerning the Palestinian political system, its infrastructure, and the relationship between its authorities and components. It was obvious that the hybrid and balanced political system that was introduced after 2003 is the main factor to widen the gap between the political parties. So that is the unbalanced hybrid political system can be diagnosed as an important factor for the failure of the peace transition of power in the previous election. The vagueness of the basic law provisions contributed to the complicating the political scene. Examples: according to Article 45 of the Basic Law, the president of the PA has the full authorities of selecting the prime minister. Article 46 stated that the role of the prime minister is complementary to the president's role. However, Article 63 stated that the cabinet is the major executive authority that is entitled the authority of drafting government's program. This program must be approved only by the legislative authority without referring back to the president. The Basic Law did not include any provisions concerning the procedures that must be taken into account when selecting a specific candidate to form a government, whether this candidate must belong to the biggest parliamentary bloc or not. The Basic Law did not also include provisions concerning the relationship between the president and the prime minister in some crucial matters pertaining consultation with the president to select the members of the government, or the approval of the president to the ministerial statement before its referral to the parliament. We do have another problematic issue here that may complicate the political scene, which is the relationship between the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian Liberation Movement. This relationship went through so many phases between 1994 and 2006, and after the signature of the Oslo Accord between the PLO and the Israeli government, it was agreed that the Transitional Palestinian Authority must be formed, which is entitled the function of self-governance. Accordingly, the Palestinian Central Council took the decision of establishing the Palestinian Authority on the 12th of October 1993. Before the establishment of the BA, some leaders of the PLO expressed their concerns regarding their exclusion from the political process. Therefore, and in order to contain these concerns, it was decided that the members of the PLO were the members of the BA, and the head of the BA were made the head of the PLO. This period between 1994 and 2006 did not witness any serious discussions concerning the relationship between the two bodies, the PLO and the BA. This was due to the fact that the BA was supposedly a transitional body established for 5 years. Afterwards, the process of Palestinian state building will take place. Moreover, the Palestinian opposition was outside the political scene. Accordingly, there was no real necessity to embark on such a discussion. With the issuance of the Basic Law, the Palestinian Basic Law in 2003, the manifestation of conflict between the PLO and the BA started to be more visible, since this Basic Law was designed to be the Basic Law of the BA only. Since that time, there has been conflict between the institutions of the BA and the institutions of the PLO. The relationship between the PLO and the BA after 2006 even became much more complicated because the ambiguous relationship between these parties contributed to complicate the conflict between the political powers and impeded the process of peaceful transition of power, especially after the Palestinian opposition came to the political scene. After winning the elections and forming a government, Hamas attempted to use its success to penetrate the PLO since it was the political party that was administering the BA. The conflict between Fatah and Hamas was intense. In this conflict, Fatah was trying to empower the PLO again and revive its roles and institutions through withdrawing some authorities from the BA and referring them back to the PLO. For instance, the negotiation file was taken from the BA and given to the PLO again. The presidential decree number 6 of 2011 states that the Palestinian News Agency, Wafa, is one of the institutions of the PLO. Moreover, Fatah claimed that the Palestinian embassies were representing the PLO, not the BA. So these are, very dialectic relationships. This dialectic relationship between the BA and the PLO is complicating the Palestinian political scene, and this is not resolved yet. And these issues has to be resolved before any elections. We do have problems actually concerning the executive powers as well. I'm going to tackle the problems of the security sector and the problems of civil service as well. The problems of peaceful transition of power in the security sector. There were contradictory provisions in the basic law concerning the Palestinian security sector. These provisions can constitute a point of disagreement and impede the peaceful transition of power. According to Article 39 of the basic law, the president of the PA is the head of the army forces and the one who is fully charged to administer the security sector. On the other hand, Article 69, paragraph 7 states that the Prime Minister is entitled the authority of maintaining peace and security. This requires him to obtain wide authorities to run the security sector. The conflict over acquiring the authorities to administer security sector started between the President and the Prime Minister in 2003 after introducing the position of Prime Minister in the Palestinian political system. However, these conflicts were deepened after Hamas won the elections and formed its first government. This urged Hamas as a reaction to formulate or to form the executive forces or قوة تنفيذية as a substitute for the security forces that Hamas has no authority over, especially after decreasing the authorities of the Ministry of Interior concerning the security sector. The role of the Ministry of Interior was purely a civil role. So, these complicating or these vague provisions of the basic law can cause another problem in different future elections as well. Civil service sector as well can be problematic. Civil service law number 4 of 1998 managed to regulate civil service sector. It clarified the procedures of occupying civil service positions in a transparent way and methods of appointing highly ranked employees. However, these provisions can be abused during the transitional periods because the basic law does not contain strict identification for the outgoing legislative council and its authorities during the transitional periods. Additionally, the basic law does not identify the authorities of the government during the transitional periods. In other words, basic law did not give enough attention to the transitional periods. This can make civil service sector another battlefield in the process of the transition of power. I'll give you an example. The 19th government, for example, during the transitional period managed to appoint the head of civil service bureau who was affiliated to Fatah and make him following the president directly and ignored all of its previous reform efforts which aimed at connecting this bureau with the cabinet instead of the presidency. These examples have negatively affected the Palestinian cause and weakened it drastically for so many years to come. The opponents of the Palestinian cause could claim easily that Palestinians are not ready for self-governance and the establishment of a full sovereign Palestinian state is too far away dream. It also had negative implications on the ordinary Palestinians themselves. Some of them start to lose their beliefs and the justice of their national cause. Mahmoud Darwish expressed that in his famous poem when he actually said that أنت منذ الآن غيرك هل كان علينا أن نسقط من علو شاهق ونرى دمنا على أيدينا لندرك أننا لسنا ملائكة كما كنا نظن؟ وهل كان علينا أيضا أن نكشف أمام الملأ لكي لا تبقى حقيقتنا عذراء؟ كم كذبنا حين قلنا نحن استثناء. In conclusion, the real democratic process that the Palestinians are looking for is a process that contains all segments of Palestinian political segments, a real democratic process which absorbs the fact that there are new political players coming to the scene, which requires new actions, new series of actions to accommodate these variables. This comes only through adopting a legal framework that fills the current gaps that negatively affect democratic process or any future democratic process. From a legal perspective, I can say that postponing elections can be or is very disappointing. However, conducting the elections without embarking on the process of legal reform, especially basic law, can lead to more disastrous consequences that undermines the Palestinian cause. We need to push for elections, but we need simultaneously to push for legal reform for all the legal frameworks that regulate these elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aya, for this legal review. We'll move now to Salem, who's going to give us an overview of the international and regional implications factors. Thank you. The floor is yours, Salem.
Thanks, Leila, and thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. For full disclosure, I also want to say that I wear another hat. I'm a member of a group called Jil al-Tajdid al-Demokrati, which is a young group that's come together made up of young Palestinians that's trying to work towards transforming the Palestinian political system to become more democratic and representative. So I come with those views as well. But let me start by answering the question, why were the elections called in the first place? And I think as many remember, early in January, the PA, the president and his close circle were trying to court the Biden administration. If you want to look at the manner and the way these elections were called, organized, structured, and conducted, it can be very telling that they were not done to address the fundamental needs of the Palestinian people, which is to have a political system, a new political system that can act as a vehicle for our national movement, especially when we're transitioning from two different paradigms, the paradigm of Oslo into a paradigm of apartheid, where we don't have a system that can carry us into it, allow the participation of 13 million Palestinians all over the world, offer them representation, a voice to shape their future, a national vision, and to mobilize and engage Palestinians again in a political system. That's not what was done. And if that was the primary concern, elections would have started with a reformed PNC, the Palestinian National Council of the PLO, not the PLC. The PLC at the moment has jurisdiction over 40% of the West Bank. If that's what our national movement has been relegated to, that's an extremely sad day. The PNC has never been directly elected, ever, and has always been decided by a quota system, obviously as part of a national liberation movement, but things have changed. We're in 2021 now, and there needs to be the ability to be able to directly elect your representative to a Palestinian parliament that represents the Palestinian people, in which they can have the agency to discuss and talk about where we go from now, because at the moment we're lost. There isn't a clear vision and a clear strategy. And then also the PLC election. The PLC elections, I'm part of, by the way, full disclosure, I'm part of the generation that's never voted in a national election before. I'm 32, soon to be 32. And after 15 years of repression and no space for any type of political participation, growing authoritarianism, whether it's in the West Bank or Gaza, there was an announcement of elections, and they told the people, get ready in 3 months. And this is highly problematic also because there were changes and alterations to the election law, which I think Aya will probably be better placed to discuss, but these had fundamental impact on how people could participate in these PLC elections. The average age in Palestine is 21, right? The average leadership positions within the PLO, 70. Yet there are 2.8 million potential voters in the PLC elections. 1.2 million of them were almost completely disenfranchised because of the new election laws. You had to be younger than 28 to become a candidate and run on a list. You had to, if you worked for specific sectors, you had to resign before, not when you win, you had to resign before you even participated. And then you also had to pay $20,000 to register an electoral list. I mean, who has $20,000 in this economy? So those are some of the structural challenges that were placed on people in terms of participation. Then there was the complete shifting of the electoral system. In 2006, we voted in local constituencies, the governance. There were allocated seating, then there was also mixed with national proportional representation. That was changed entirely in favor of national proportional representation, which meant if you weren't an established party with a base across Palestine, where you could compete in the big cities, there was no chance for you to challenge the powers that already held the monopoly in the West Bank and Gaza. And that's also a fundamental issue. So when you look at a population that's the majority under 30, I was extremely skeptical when the announcement happened for elections, because I saw this as a way to legitimize the same faces, the same system, to please the Biden administration and the Europeans, who could potentially negotiate on behalf of Palestinians and sign a peace deal. I mean, truthfully, that was it. But I saw people all around me from my generation extremely excited by the chance to finally be able to vote for your representative and choose and elect who can speak on our behalf. But we saw that the trajectory from the announcement to when the lists were supposed to be submitted at the end of March was a complete removal and withdrawal from the political arena for young people. And we had a lot of conversations with different groups, and they said to us, well, why should we participate? The outcome is already known. They're likely going to postpone the election anyway. We heard that quite a bit. And the structural challenges they imposed on us have been immense. So that's a big issue we need to ask ourselves. I think the Americans and the Europeans were very much worried about the outcome of the election. Who's going to win, Hamas or Fatah, and what's that proportion going to be reflected in the PLC? But actually, the anti-democratic measures that forced a very specific outcome have been going on for the last 15 years and have been put into place when the elections were announced on the PLC to really eliminate any form of opposition or new thinking. And that's fundamentally the problem, right? These were never democratic elections. Similarly, the way they were called was in a very undemocratic, untransparent way. And similarly, the way they were called off and postponed was done without much explanation other than Jerusalem. To me, it boggles my mind how, after seeing young people defy occupation and apartheid in Jerusalem and challenge everything they were doing around the old city, not to have that spirit reflected in a decision to confront the occupation and hold elections in Jerusalem and be forced to be oppressed rather than fully withdraw. And this is the problem. So to say a bit about highlighting the problems, but I also want to highlight what young people are doing about them. Jil Tajdid Demokrati, this is a group that represents or is made up of Palestinians from all over the world. Palestinians from Gaza, Jerusalem, the West Bank, 48 refugee camps, and all over the world. And the idea is to hold our own virtual elections. And we're still going through. We're announcing our virtual parliamentary list, which is made up of 9 women and 9 men on Monday, May 10th. And everybody in Palestine will have the chance to vote for the list that is running on a progressive program that reflects issues not only just about everyday necessities like healthcare, education, etc., but also tries to bridge that with a national movement, which I think has been missing for a very long time. And anybody can vote for those elections until the 31st of May. And the idea here is for a lot of young people, and this is to me one of the biggest problems. The young people are completely withdrawn from political life. They've been depoliticized under Oslo, the Oslo generation. And so when we're doing this exercise, it's not so much to compete with the factions, we're competing with political apathy. And that's, to me, even scarier. And the idea is to inspire young people to say, look, you can take matters into your own hands. You can organize, you can mobilize, and we can talk about the things that matter to us. And this can be the start. But the real demand is that we need a political system that's democratic and that could give every Palestinian a voice, no matter where they are. And and at the moment, جيل التجديد الديمقراطي, the virtual elections and the virtual parliamentary list, and I say this sadly, is the only democratic process in Palestine where people actually get to vote for something. And we're going through with it. And many of the discussions internally were in the group were built around a scenario where it was very likely that the elections were going to be postponed. And we all know here it wasn't because of Jerusalem. It was because the powers that be were not confident that they could keep their monopoly on power if that happened. And we need to call that for what it is. So yeah, this is the context. And I want to also reflect on a point when there was when the postponement came, when the announcement came, there was high levels of security all over the West Bank. I don't know if it was the same in Gaza, but probably. They were anticipating people to come out and protest. Hundreds of, 100 people came out here and there. There weren't mass protests because people fundamentally do not believe in the system anymore. This is what it's like to be fully frustrated and retreated. And this is our starting point. And we have a long way to go, sadly, a long way to go. And we need to start being able to give answers, not just about the national movement, but also about education, healthcare, jobs, to strengthen people's resilience on the land. And and this is a very important message, I think, to Europeans, to regional actors, to the Americans. If you want to promote democracy in Palestine, allow us to make an environment that's more conducive for that to happen. And it's what elections is pushed for. And for me, as a young Palestinian, I want to start with a reformed PNC and PNC direct elections that can give every Palestinian a voice, so we can finally start figuring out where we're going as a people and what's the national vision we're heading to. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Salem, for this very interesting presentation that also highlights how, despite all the restrictions that the PA has put for these elections, the restriction on age, the amount of money somebody needed to have in order to participate in the election, despite all this, which you'd have said would have allowed a leadership to come which is more in line with the present leadership, Abbas felt quite threatened that he had to postpone it, which is, quite indicative, as well as, what you talked about Al-Jad, which is something very promising and very encouraging, that people still want to have this right, and the new generation want to have a voice, even if it is a limited voice. So this is very nice. I see that there's a number of questions. So I don't know if you also can see it. Maybe we'll start with the question which is directed to Mr. Adnan, and it was posed also in Arabic. I can read it to you in Arabic and translate it. وهناك الكثير من المحللين الإسرائيليين يقولون بأن حماس تحاول تأجيج الوضع لاحقاً لأسباب منها تأجيل الانتخابات. ما هي رؤيتكم من الداخل في غزة? The question really asks, says the following. There are some Israeli analysts who say that Hamas was trying to complicate the situation to delay the elections. What do you think is the view from inside Gaza? تفضل أستاذ عدنان.
لا شك أن الوضع الأمني في الأراضي الفلسطينية بعد تأجيل الانتخابات اختلف عما قبلها، وهذه قناعة فلسطينية سائدة الآن. وهناك تقديم موقف في حماس يرى أن أبو مازن في النهاية حقق مصلحة إسرائيلية بتأجيل الانتخابات. الإسرائيليون معنيون بأن يحرم الفلسطينيين هذا الحق، وتصوير الفلسطيني للرأي العام العالمي بأن هذا الشعب غير مؤهل لإدارة شؤونه بنفسه وغير قادر على خوض ممارسة ديمقراطية، فضلا عن أسباب أمنية متعلقة بخشية إسرائيل من فوز حماس في ضفة غربية، وبالتالي أن تعيد تثبيت أقدامها في الضفة وتنفيذ عمليات مسلحة من جديد. لذلك يمكن لنا في قادم أيام أن نتوقع مزيد من الضغط الأمني في الضفة الغربية بالذات.
No doubt the security situation in Gaza has changed a great deal. There is also, after the decision of postponement, there is a wide range conviction within the Palestinians in Gaza also because they see that Abu Mazen has achieved an Israeli interest with this decision. In addition to that, there will be also further and more of Israeli pressure in the West Bank.
المتوقع في قادم الأيام أن نرى مزيد من الضغط الأمني في الضفة الغربية، تنفيذ عمليات هجمات معينة بالتزامن مع الزلزالات الإسرائيلية في مدينة القدس المسجد الأقصى. ولعل كلام الأمس مسؤول كتائب القسام جناح عسكري لحماس في غزة كان غير مسبوق بالتهديد بالدخول على خط أحداث القدس والشيخ جراح إذا ما استمرت إسرائيل في ذلك.
We are also anticipating that there will be many security operations, wide security operations in the West Bank and also in Jerusalem. And we have seen some of the face-off or conflicts with Kataib al-Qassam and the incidents in Jerusalem. So we will expect more of those operations and security campaigns in the West Bank.
تزامن كل ذلك مع تأجيل الانتخابات بالتأكيد صب مزيد من الزيت على نار التوتر القائم أصلا.
So in addition to all that, this decision of postponement have increased the incitement and added oil to the fire in the whole situation.
نعم.
Adnan, yeah, it is worrisome what's happening. Okay, I have another question, and this one goes to Mr. Salem. He says, the impression we get here in Washington is a postponement by Hamas could not have been possible without Hamas's, the postponement of the election could not have been possible without Hamas's acquiescence. Are there any talk about a unity government between the two camps? I mean, I suppose I can open it to any one to talk about that. Maybe Ayak has something to say as well to it. Salem.
To be honest, I think there needed to be agreement across the board, and I don't know the internal Hamas position. Publicly they were threatening. Maybe Adnan can say more about that. There needs to be elections and they need to go forward. I don't know if that was a tactical maneuver to get concessions out of Fatah and the PA. But there was rumors around a unity government right after the elections were postponed, but we haven't seen anything yet. So that's all I have to say about that.
Aya?
I totally agree that the whole process of elections and announcing elections was just a tactical maneuvering, as Salem said. I mean, it seems like Abbas was trying to attract the attention of Biden's government, and he did not intend from the start actually to conduct elections. So this delay was not something that was unexpected. All of us, realized in some way that this election won't be conducted, and it seems like this relationship between Fatah and Hamas is fluctuating and did not get to a certain agreement point. So I don't think, I have any.
I'm going to go throw the ball again to Mr. Adnan about, is it true what some people here in DC think that the postponement by Abbas could not have been possible without Hamas's acquiescence?
إذا فهمت السؤال جيدا، هل أنه الأوساط في أمريكا تتكلم أن تأجيل الانتخابات من قبل عباس لم يمر بدون موافقة حماس؟
في انطباع إنه يعني قرار عباس اتخذ لأنه يعني حماس كانت راضية أو متوقعة أو يعني في مصلحة الانتخابات.
الثانية. شوف، أتكلم بشكل أكثر صراحة الآن. قرار الذهاب إلى الانتخابات قبل المصالحة لم يحظى بموافقة كبيرة في داخل حماس ابتداءً.
Let's be frank here, because the decision to conduct the elections before the reconciliation did not find any support from Hamas in the first place.
منذ انقسام 2007 حتى اليوم كانت تقدير في حماس انه المصالحه ثم الانتخابات.
So Hamas has always thought since 2007 division that there should be the reconciliation before any elections.
وهذا كان تقدير صائب وحقيقي. الذي حصل أن مباحثات جبريل رجوب مع صالح العاروري قيادي حماس وفتح تغلب على رأي السائد، وبالتالي لم تشأ حماس أن يعني تفشل هذه التفاهمات، لكن دون أن يكون هناك لا أخفيكم رضا عام عن هذه القناعة الجديدة.
Yes, because of the continuation. I'm sorry, because of the continuation about this reconciliation efforts and the talks between Jibril Rajoub and Saleh Al-Ardi has also achieved some of the hindrance that was standing before reconciliation, so that people can move forward with election.
عدم تحمس حماس الكبير لهذا القرار جعلها تسجل قائمة انتخابية في آخر يومين فقط، وكان عندها تقدير موقف يشير بشكل أو بآخر إلى أنه أبو مازن سيؤجل الانتخابات. ولذلك لاحظت معي لم يكن رد فعل حماس كبيرا وصاخبا مثل قوى أخرى مثل دحلان أو برغوث أو سواه.
So Hamas was not really very excited about the elections, because it was anticipating that Abbas might resort to postponing the elections, and thus has Hamas did the last minute preparations before this decision was made.
So if I can just make clear that what is being said is that within Hamas there was a division on whether we should go for the election without reconciliation. And the Saleh Al-Aruri line was of the opinion, let's try elections before reconciliation. And that what made Hamas being like, let's try either way. And both cases we show that Fatah is the one, or Abbas is the one responsible for failing to bring forth any resolution either way. You're right. Do I understand you right? فهمتك صح أستاذ أخ عدنان؟
إذا كان بإمكان توضيح أكثر بس.
Right. Go ahead.
السؤال غير واضح بدقة، عفوا.
هو السؤال كان عن تأجيل أو قرار تأجيل الانتخابات أصلا، هل كان يعني متوقعا ومقبولا أو يعني كان طبيعيا بالنسبة لحماس؟ هذا السؤال
كان
الأصلي.
متوقعا ليس مقبولا، يعني كان في تقدير موقف في حماس جدا على نطاق واسع من قيادة حماس إنه أبو مازن ليس جادا كثيرا في إجراء الانتخابات طالما لم يستطع أن يوحد قوائم الحركة داخليا عندهم فتح. ولكن في اللحظة التي فشلت فيها جهود
Yes, the decision was not acceptable by Hamas by any means, because Abbas was really not sure about the divisions and the breakups within his Fatah lists, and so it was not a surprise, but it was not an acceptable decision by no means.
كان لافت انه حجم رد فعل حماس مثلا الشعبي والجماهيري اكثر غضبا من رد فعل قياده حماس السياسيه الهادئه المرنه.
And we have seen also the popular reaction by Hamas followers. It was stronger than even Hamas leadership.
Well, that's very helpful. Okay, I have a few questions for Salem, because people were fascinated to hear that there is a youth mobilization happening. So I have two questions for you on this issue. One is, so ask the following: does the frustration by Palestinian youth regarding elections and voicelessness cut across factional lines as indicated by public opinions? And will it impact both Fatah and Hamas? So I'll start with this question before I go to the next one.
Sure, thanks, Leila. I think a very important statistic to note here is 67 87% of young people in Palestine do not belong to a political faction. I think that's very clear. That shows how there's a complete withdrawal from that form of political participation that probably came much more with the generation that was, of age, let's say, during the first Intifada. I think the process of Oslo, the process of the second Intifada, and then the years that have come after it have completely removed Palestinians, I think, young Palestinians, from any type of political work. The other thing is to really note is you look at the youth wings of these political parties. I mean, even within their internal elections, I don't want to talk about Hamas because there's a bit more of a democratic internal infrastructure where there's regular elections, but a lot of the youth within Fatah, for example, haven't had the chance to even join some of the leadership councils, like the Revolutionary Council, etc. So even generations within the factions, and even the PLO factions who are under 50 have never had a chance to really serve in leadership positions or really shape the internal trajectory of these parties. So within society as a whole, and I think within even the politicized Palestinians within the factions, there's been a marginalization and disenfranchisement of youth across the board. And I think that reflects the level of frustration, and I think reflects to some extent that there weren't mass protests when the announcement decision was made. The decision for postponement was made. Everybody's is kind of retreated.
Okay, another question I have for you is the following. The virtual elections planned among younger Palestinians on May 31 seem promising. Once these elections take place, what happens then? Can you say more?
Yeah, so Jil al-Tajdeed's mission, I think, as we see it, is to transform the Palestinian political system to become more democratic and representative. And we see engagement on many different levels. In this very specific phase, we went with a virtual parliamentary list because as we laid out, it wasn't really democratic, a lot of structural challenges in terms of participation, etc. I think that the next would be to look at the PNC and trying to mobilize people around PNC reform and PNC direct elections. And I think we're also looking at municipal elections down the road. Municipalities in Palestine are central political organizing bodies that have come way before Oslo and represent a big part of our social political life. And I think many people here care a lot about the municipalities as a service providing entity as well. And it's the one they deal with on a day-to-day, whether it's within cities or more the village councils across the board. And I think it's very important to see youth engagement and representation there. So it's a long-term strategy to engage on every different level of the Palestinian political system to try to see that transformation happen. Not just a virtual parliamentary list. It doesn't end there, but it moves to also engaging in different elections depending on the context.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have this question now to Aya and Ustaz Adnan. Could you please elaborate or speculate? Had the election taken place, could you share your predictions of the outcome? Maybe I'll start with Aya and then we'll...
I actually seriously I don't know what to say really, but I do believe that most people here, they lost confidence in the most major parties, Fatah and Hamas, and I'm talking about West Bank here. That we lost confidence in both of them, and we just tried to look for alternatives. Who's going to actually substitute both of them? Because both of us actually were disappointing and led us to, unfortunately, very disappointing stage. And we are in a big trouble and crisis, and instead of just going through these dilemmas, we should think about the real problematic issues and the real crisis that facing the Palestinian cause. And after Trump, the pressure was after Trump's period, the pressure was very high. So instead of just going through these internal conflicts, we should concentrate in much more important details. And unfortunately, both of them, they just went through details. Both of them, they just want to monopolize the authority and monopolize the control, and they just want to be in authority as long as possible, which is very disappointing. So I do believe that, maybe people will just go and punish both of them, through these elections. In the first election, 2006, people punished Fatah because of its corruption and thought that Hamas might be a good alternative. And, it turned out to be very disappointing as well. So maybe these election people will just punish both of them and get with very unexpected results.
So you expect that what would have happened was a repudiation of both parties.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is very interesting. Okay, الأخ عدنان, what do you think would have, شو توقعاتك لو صارت الانتخابات؟
بتذكر ام كلثوم لسه فاكر.
لسه فاكر.
ما في انتخابات، ما في انتخابات. المرحله القادمه يعني احنا امام تحولات صدقا، يعني هذا مضحك مبكي والله، لكن لا صعب. يعني ما بعد قرار التاجيل لن يكون قبله. اليوم احنا عندنا معطيات شخصيه كباحثين وصحفيين انه قرار التاجيل يعني اوجد شرخ اضافي في داخل قياده فتح الحاليه اللي محيطه بابو مازن، لانه مثلا جبريل جوب اكثر خساره من تاجيل الانتخابات اكثر من حماس مثلا. جبريل عينه على الرئاسه هناك على المقاطعه، ولذلك قرار التاجيل كان بعيد عنه، يعني هو اللي اجل انتخابات ابو مازن ويعني المحيطين به، يعني حسين الشيخ وماجد فرج بشكل اساسي. ولذلك قرار التاجيل لم يكن ينزل بردا وسلاما على قياده فتح الحاليه. وحتى ابو مازن لو اعتقد انه قرار التاجيل سيكون يؤدي الى او مقتدى معي انا اسف، يكفي هكذا.
اي نعم. شكرا. Thank you. This question reminds me of Kulthum's do you still remember a hit? Actually, the upcoming phase will be very transformative. Today we have these parameters of the decision of postponement that is really affecting more of the divisions that have existed before. Like Jibril Rajoub, if you can look into how more of a loss he will face, even more than Hamas. And Abbas' decision has really reinforced all these divisions and disappointments by all means. If you look at his list candidates, Ihsan al-Sheikh and Majid Faraj and others, they are really losing big time in the popular polls.
التقدير الأكثر ترجيحاً هو بقاء الوضع على ما هو عليه في غزة والضفة، وبانتظار تطور خارج عن إرادتنا كفلسطينيين، وهو أنه يعني متعلق بالرئيس، بقائه غيابه، يعني أيا كان، يعني بعد قدري من السماء يتدخل الآن في هذا الحال، بس بعد بصير تغييرات جوهرية في النظام السياسي الفلسطيني. بقاء الوضع على ما هو عليه، يعني إحنا في حالة تأبيد إلى إشعار آخر.
So it's more likely that this situation will be the status quo for a while, and then we will see what Abbas is going to do to make any changes furthermore. But we will wait until after this status quo is over, so we can probably move forward in a different direction.
قبل ما انسى ليلى مهمه، بقاء على ما هو عليه في غزه والضفه هو حلم اسرائيل الكبير.
And this status quo is actually the big dream of Israel.
I do have a question for Ustad Adnan. Actually, with the fact that I stated, why does Hamas expect a different outcome if it wins the elections this time?
يعني موافقة حماس على التأجيل الانتخابات أو عدم، خلينا نقول عدم غضبها الكبير. حماس في الضفة الغربية. أكمل؟
أي صوت كان بقطع شوية.
ماشي. أنا أقول إنه موافقة حماس أو عدم غضب حماس الكبير على تأجيل الانتخابات يعني قد يكون انه الى حد ما لم تكن حماس منذ البدايه متشجعه للذهاب الى الانتخابات في هذه الاوضاع. هي في غزه في حاله حصار اقتصادي وتخشى من شعبيتها المتراجعه الى حد ما، اقتصاد وحصار واوضاع صعبه. في الضفه الغربيه ليس حضرتك ادرى مني يا ايه وسالم في الضفه، حماس في الضفه غير موجوده عمليا يعني ما في تنظيم ولا تحركات، صح في تضامن تعاطف معها، لكن على الاقل ما في اطلاقا يعني تنظيم يقود حمله انتخابيه. ولذلك قد يكون جاء قرار التاجيل الى حد ما. يعني ابو مازن اخذ يعني باللغه العربيه الفصحى العاميه سواد الوجه قدام الفلسطينيين، وحماس الى حد ما لم تكن يعني متشجعه من البدايه هذا الموضوع.
It's actually this anger of Hamas was not that big upon the decision of postponement, because it was expecting it, and it was not really very encouraged by the elections because of the situation that it was facing under this economic isolation. It also didn't have much of an existence in the West Bank, and it wasn't really hoping or anticipating any electoral wins in the West Bank rather than Gaza as well. And this was just expected from Abu Mazen, President Abbas, who just took the ugly side of the decision or policy making or decision making.
Okay, can I ask a question to the participant about the 36 lists? The 36 proposed list, did they include a joint list of Hamas and Fatah members, or were they all over different type of lists? Salem, can you explain to that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a joint Hamas and Fatah list. I think there were some lists from the parties. The three Fatah lists, Marwan, Qudwa, Tahlan, and then the official list. There are a lot of independent lists, and something that's very interesting, a lot of clan lists as well, that were much more local and regional rather than party. And then there was the Tafh al-Kail list, which I think definitely wins the most clever name. But they were made up of the anti-corruption movements, and I think they have quite a popular base. They organized around the social security law protests a couple of years ago and grew into a very strong movement that was reflected in the PLC lists registration. And Leila, I just want to add one point here. I think just around the postponement, and I think we need to ask ourselves as a panel, you know, in which configuration is an Israeli government that's going further and further right ever going to allow elections in Jerusalem? So, and this is a very serious question that we all, I think, need to address, because this will essentially indefinitely postpone any form of PLC elections in Palestine. And unless, you know, President Abbas, you know, accepts to vote in Abu Dis or in the Swedish consulate or online, you know, this is not something that's going to happen anytime soon. And there wasn't any plan or clarity on how that's going to be delivered. So I think that's a very important point to make, because it's.
I agree with you, but I do think there was ways, as was explained, there were ways to include the Jerusalemites, especially that they voted in 1996. So I think that would have been circumvented. That even if you vote in the Swedish embassy, actually it is even better to the Palestinian cause, because it just proves the continuity of the occupation, as Tahreer explains in her presentation. I think the big challenge is, as was rightly explained by everybody here, is that the present president is not interested in elections, is worried about them. And the factionalism of Fatah magnifies that now the major problem is how Fatah is splintering. And also, as Mr. Adnan explained, which we did not address much, there has been regional influences about not holding these elections, for good or worse, which we can understand because we are part also of a larger region. We had the Arab uprising 10 years ago, which were all about participation and voting and having a voice. And if now we start with the Palestinian electing, what would be the reverberation on the rest of the Arab world? So I do think the regional dimension is important to explain part of why this has been postponed. The question will be how viable this is going to be in the future. I have one last question and I have 5 minutes. So what I would like just to ask, somebody asked whether you think that Hanan Ashrawi could lead a popular movement. I mean, I'll give whoever wants to answer it, and I'll ask each one of you to conclude with 2 minutes. How do you see the situation moving forward over at least the next year or the next 6 months?
Maybe as someone who worked for Dr. Hanan Ashrawi at some point in their career, I can say that her resignation, I think, partially was made because the system was no longer reflecting any form of democratic process internally, and it culminated in where we are today. And two, I think she genuinely believes that a new generation should have its turn and role in being able to lead the Palestinian national movement forward. And I think she's working very hard in facilitating those younger voices, the inclusion of more women as well in politics. So I don't think she would be interested in leading a movement. And I think she's very much supporting a lot of people in being able to engage and politically participate.
Okay, thank you.
Trying not to speak on her behalf, but
okay, yeah, no, I share this view, this opinion. I think it's time. There's plenty of wonderful Palestinian women and men, young, who can take the movement and need to move it forward. So each generation did its due. That generation gave a lot. We're very thankful, but now there's a new generation, and you definitely represent it. Okay, Ustaz Adnan, how do you see the situation moving forward over the short term or long term, in 1 minute?
صحيح. فقط استدراك السؤال الأول حول القوائم 36. هذا سؤال مهم وحساس. 36 قائمة انتخابية لقرابة يعني 1.5 مليون أو 2 مليون ناخب، هذا رقم كبير يعد صراحة، لكنه يعبر عن رغبة فلسطينية جادة بالتغيير في ممارسة حق الانتخاب. والحقيقة أنه أبو مازن يعني شكل صدمة وصفعة قوية لكل هؤلاء الفلسطينيين الراغبين بحق التغيير السياسي القائم السلمي والدستوري والقانوني. لكن 36 قائمة موجودة في غزة والضفة موزعة. عندنا حوالي 7-8 قوائم انتخابية حزبية كانت فصائلية، والباقين إما نقابيين، مرأة، طلاب جامعيين، مهنيين، مستقلين، وبعضهم أو كثير منهم رافض لوجود حماس أو فتح على مشهد القيادة السياسية الفلسطينية.
Let me first speak to the question of the 36 lists that I think is a very big number for 1.5 million voter or more, because Palestinians had really a very strong and serious desire to do these elections. And speaking of the lists in Gaza, we have like 7 or 8 party lists, but many others are either lists by the trade unions, by women organizations, by professionals, or independent candidates.
في العرف السياسي الفلسطيني عندنا في غزة والضفة قاعدة متبعة اسمها الناس تكره من يحكمها، بالعادة هكذا. وبالتالي كما هناك قوائم في غزة مناهضة لحماس، هناك في الضفة قوائم مناهضة لفتح، وقد رأينا ذلك.
It's also very traditional here. We have in Gaza that people hate their rulers. They don't like the people who govern them or rule over them. And also because even in Gaza, there are opposers or opposition to Hamas. There are also opposition to Fatah on the West Bank.
Can I give the last word then to Aya, as we are, about to finish?
Thank you so much. I'm sorry if I'm a pessimist person, but the situation is grim, and I just cannot say more than that. If we actually put this democratic process on hold for 15 years, we just cannot remember, oh yeah, we didn't actually go through a democratic process for so long, and now we need just to resume from where we stopped. This democratic process needs a real infrastructure. You know, we need actually to make so much reform before we get to that point. In order not to repeat the same disastrous consequences of the second elections, we have to avoid what happened in the past and learn lessons from the past. We have to do actions. And unfortunately, you know, because we didn't do much in the past 15 years, we could not expect much at the moment.
Well, thank you very much. This could not have been a better conclusion about the importance of doing the nitty-gritty work. I still remain optimistic because even if those elections got postponed, they're an indication that there is a new generation coming up and wanting a voice and will express a voice in a more serious way. We just have to persevere. Please, I would like to thank very much all the panelists, Mr. Adnan Abu Amer from Gaza, Aya Randal from Doha Center, and Salem Barahmeh from the Institute. I never get your name of the Institute really well. The Institute, the Executive Director of the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. And I want also to thank our translator, Al-Maghdad Jibril, for his excellent work. Thank you, and the Arab Washington Center for hosting this very interesting panel, and with the help of the Institute for Palestine Studies. I wish you all the best of luck, and I really hope we'll meet again to hopefully sooner to talk that the elections were resumed, and the struggle continues, as we say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you so much for
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.